Welcome to Advancing Our Church, a Changing Our World podcast about Catholic stewardship, leadership, and advancement. I'm Jim Friend. Welcome back, everyone. We have another great show for you today. We're going to be talking about the new book, The Generosity Crisis, and the case for making a radical connection with your donors. Anyone who is working in fundraising today knows how difficult it is to retain donors. There's so much competition out there for the dollar that we cannot continue to do things the way we always have. Our discussion today will delve into what this new book reveals about how the nature and language of philanthropy are changing and what can be done about it. This conversation is a must for anyone who is trying to convince their leadership that direct mail fundraising and online fundraising alone is not sustainable. I'm glad you're with us today because we are making the case that fundraisers need to create those radical connections with their donors to solve this generosity crisis. And so, without further ado, let's get to work. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to Advancing Our Church, a Changing Our World podcast about Catholic stewardship, leadership, and advancement. I'm Jim Friend. Welcome back, everybody. Great to have you. I am here with two authors of the book, The Generosity Crisis, The Case for Radical Connection to Solve Humanity's Greatest Challenges. And we're here with Nathan Chappell and our own Brian Crimmins. Nathan, Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's great to be here. And I just had a smile when you said the word authors because it's still a new thing that we're trying on. So for Brian and I, it's new frontiers. It's very exciting.
Nathan, I felt the exact same thing. I noticed both you and I chuckled and smiled. Thanks, Jim, for putting that tag on there for us. It's good, nice.
Absolutely, yeah. It's forever going to be a part of your title now. That's awesome. Well, let me just, for the sake of our audience, just provide a little introduction to both Brian and Nathan before we get started with our conversation about the book. So we'll start with Brian. Brian Crimmins is the Chief Executive Officer of Changing Our World. Brian is responsible for the overall management, success, and growth of our firm and has personally provided counsel to clients such as the Diocese of Rockville Center, the Catholic Community Foundation of Long Island, the Global Solidarity Fund, Diocese of Dallas, Roman Catholic Foundation of Eastern Missouri, St. John's University, his alma mater, the Pontifical North American College in Rome, the Catholic Alumni Partnership, and the Diocese of Brooklyn, just to name a few. Brian oversees all aspects of Changing Our World's service lines, including nonprofit services, corporate research and analytics, and communications. Brian has extensive experience building and managing the implementation of strategic initiatives that enables nonprofits and corporations to achieve their philanthropic goals. Brian is often called upon to speak at conferences and workshops regarding the philanthropic landscape and current trends in philanthropy, and has mentored students from Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. He serves on the board of Chaminade High School and is vice chair of the board of the Institute for Catholic Schools at St. John's University. Brian holds a Bachelor of Science degree from St. John's University and an MBA in Marketing Management from St. John's Tobin School of Business. Welcome again, Brian.
Thanks, Jim.
And Nathan Chappell is a thought leader, public speaker, and writer, and one of the world's foremost experts on the intersection between artificial intelligence and philanthropy. Nathan serves as Senior Vice President of DonorSearch, leading the research and development efforts dedicated to leveraging artificial intelligence to help nonprofits harness actionable insights from big data. In 2018, Nathan presented the first TEDx talk on the topic of artificial intelligence and the future of generosity. In 2019, Nathan was listed as one of the top 100 influencers in philanthropy. And in 2021, Nathan founded fundraising.ai as a member-centric collaboration with a focus on data ethics, data equality, privacy and security, and sustainability. Nathan holds a master's in nonprofit administration from the University of Notre Dame, an MBA from the University of Redlands, a certificate in international economics from the University of Cambridge, and a certificate in artificial intelligence from MIT. Welcome again, Nathan. And Nathan, you and I were recently together at the International Catholic Stewardship Conference in Anaheim, where you presented this book to, I think, a very eager group of development professionals and church leaders, which I think was very well received. And we got some great reviews from that workshop. So I'm excited to dive into this book. I had the privilege of getting a preview of it and reading through it, and Was just really intrigued by the readability of it. It was a very easy read, and it really laid out the problem of the generosity crisis. So why don't we get started maybe with our conversation, and this really could go to maybe either one or both of you on kind of what led you down the rabbit hole of discovering that there was a generosity crisis in the work that we do.
Yeah, I'll get us started, Jim, and certainly I'll let Nathan tell his version of the story, or maybe put some truth into what I'm going to say. But when Nathan and I first met, gosh, years ago now, when I had the pleasure of working with him at City of Hope, I think from my perspective, and I'd love to get his reaction to this, I felt like when I met him, we had just had very similar views on the world and on the sector that we both are in, obviously. And when you have that with somebody, when you have that sort of connection, that the lines of sort of the conversations would go from what was on the agenda for the meeting and the important work that we were doing for City of Hope, but I often found ourselves talking about many other things about happening around the sector, and it was one of those relationships and conversations that just continued, over months and years. And I'm sure a joke or two is made. We should probably put our heads together and write a book, because we were both concerned about what we saw that was happening with our sector, particularly the generosity crisis, the declining giving, and on a certain degree, I personally, I'll speak for myself, didn't necessarily feel like enough was being talked about it, or it was mainstreamed. What's that old expression? Sometimes you first have to admit you have a problem before you can get on to dealing with the solutions. And so I felt like, that we needed to do something, put our heads together. And I think Nathan and I come at our sector and at the problem of the generosity crisis from two different worlds, but it's a very holistic world when we put our thoughts together. And so I think it was summer or spring, late spring, early summer of last year, where we were both on a phone call and just decided to let's just do this. We've been talking about it. Let's jump into the deep end of the pool and start to figure out what it means to even write a book, which this was an entirely new process for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very true. When Brian and I first met years ago, I mean, there was just, there's sometimes you meet someone and it just clicks and you're like, we're going to be friends. Like, I like the way you think, and we riff off each other. And I mean, to be honest, like, truthfully, I think for me, I was hoping someone else would write this book for years, and we were talking about this type of thing, within nonprofits that we're working in or consulting with. And it was this idea that, every year, you're trying to hit an annual fundraising goal, but from a shrinking pool of donors. And I, with a background in business and economics, I started looking at this in 2012 after the Giving Pledge was signed, and just fascinated by, like, what's the effect of that going to be? Whether, the Giving Pledge, creates a new national conversation that really hadn't existed since Rockefeller and Carnegie, but now is revitalized in our modern society, and it'll either inspire lots more people to give because it's more mainstream, or it will have the opposite effect where it becomes essentially this crowding out effect where, people think, well, others are on the scene. My gift is not as important. And started looking at that 10 years ago. And again, like, I think Brian and I talked about this so many times, and we're just thinking someone's going to write about this. And I remember being in New York with Brian at one point. I literally was on a panel and I said, someone has to write this book, to the audience, not expecting that it would be us. I think lo and behold, because of our commitment to the industry, and I think just that heart of, like, wanting to advance this conversation, it was like, okay, it's time. I think it was literally like, I think we probably at a point cried uncle, and we're like, okay, someone has to do it. No one else is stepping up. We better do it.
Well, and you both bring such great perspectives from your own area of expertise. I mean, you both have a background in nonprofits and expertise in nonprofit, but I think from both the AI and the fundraising application perspective really brings all the knowledge I think that someone would need, or background, to really break open this topic. So let's talk a little bit about how just defining this problem. And the first part of your book really does a great job of that. And not just from talking about some of the data that you've seen, but also about what's out in the media. For example, you mentioned that, Elon Musk says that his company is now Stewardship or philanthropic. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the media and how that really impacts the numbers that you're seeing.
Yeah, I'll start there, Jim, because in the sense that with Elon Musk referring to his companies as philanthropy is because of for the good of humankind. I think there's some well-intentioned in that statement, right. But I also think there might be a bit more of the marketing bend to it. versus Patagonia, the news on Patagonia more recently, which feels more authentic and to who they are. But I think they play into a bit of potentially the confusion I think that's out there. That, and as we all know, being fundraisers, if there's any tension, if there's any extra hurdle towards giving, it's human nature. People aren't going to necessarily go through with that act. It's not just a giving act. It's it could be a purchasing act. And so when you have people and companies and making statements like Elon Musk, or companies making moves like Patagonia, we do think it's one of the factors of, a bit of well, it seems like they'll take care of that. Companies have lots of assets, they have lots of dollars. As we all know, being fundraisers, they still make up one of the smaller portions of the giving pie, but they have other assets to bring to the table, their employees, their products, etc. I think when you meld that with the fact that you can invest in ESG type funds now, you can put your money to good use, if you put that word, could do good in quotes. For me, it felt like the menu of ways to be generous have grown over the last 5, 10, 15 years, where 25 years ago, if you wanted to have an impact, you wrote a check to a nonprofit, and you put a lot of trust in them to do great work. And in fact, one of our endorsers, Arthur Brooks, the phenomenal Harvard professor, multiple-time New York Times bestseller, he was kind enough to, as I said, give us an endorsement. His book in 2006, Who Really Cares, was like a tipping point moment, because at that point in time, and he wrote about it, 3/4, 75% of Americans were giving to charity. And the most recent information showing that number is now 49.6, less than half. And this is where Nathan, doing his analysis, was just, as we were writing this book, and he was doing his own research, and he hit me with the comment of, do you realize if we stay on this trend, philanthropy will cease to exist in 49 years? You start to realize that there's something going on here that needs to be explored and needs to be understood.
Yeah, I'll only add to that is there is a lot of confusion. I think for a lot of people, that definition of philanthropy is changing. What does it mean? Does it mean buying responsibly, or does it mean to helping a neighbor, or does it mean giving to a traditional charity? And so we really, talk a lot about that. It's interesting, though, from a public perspective, generosity is all around us, and I think we take so much of it for granted. But this idea of the generosity crisis is really something that a lot of people don't want to talk about. Not only out in the world, most people don't even think about generosity, but even the 49.6% that give, they don't tend to think about, what does it look like in a world that's less generous? Like, what are the implications of that? Like, how is my life going to be different? And how is just civic engagement going to look? I happened to just look yesterday, the most viewed post that I made on LinkedIn last year, with like 36,000 views, was the one about Elon Musk claiming that all his companies, and I think I posted, if I buy a Tesla, does it make me a philanthropist? And and by a far margin, it was the most viewed post of any post I had made. And so it shows that there is this confusion, there's an interest in learning more. And I think that really comes down to kind of premise number one of the book, to your point, Jim, of like, just kind of laying out the facts. Like there's a point where people have been talking around this issue for so long that there just needs to be, this, I joke that you don't write a book called The Generosity Crisis to make friends. It's not, I don't think it's going to end up in many people's Christmas wish list, but at the same time, like, you need to hit the bull in the head. Like this is like, someone needs to just say it. This is what it is. Let's level set. Let's start the conversation, which is what we hope to do, kind of to demonstrate the gravity of, like, to Brian's point, with no change to this trajectory, we're going to live in a world in our lifetime or our kids' lifetime for sure, that doesn't look like our world now. And it's, I think we will, if we take generosity for granted now, we're really going to miss it later on.
You both make great points, and Nathan, just to pick up on the tail end of what you were saying there. So most all nonprofits work with different generations of donors, different levels of donors, and so are we seeing this trend as something that is prevalent with millennials, with a particular generation, or do the boomers see or the Gen Xers see generosity in the same way that millennials or Gen Xers do, or rather millennials or Gen Z do?
Well, and I can start with this, but you have to look at that through different lenses.
Sure.
In terms of the largest drop off in terms of individuals not giving to traditional charities, it is millennials. And at this point, there's a group called the Generosity Commission, and that's really studying this. And you have to really look at the underlying conditions of why, and if you conversely look at boomers who were largely grew up in a religious environment, were taught and modeled the virtues of giving and the responsibility of giving back, that we weren't here just to consume, but that we were going to leave a legacy. A lot of that is, as there's been a decrease in just percentage of people, generosity is it may be inherent, as humans, but it's largely modeled. It needs to be shown to us, and because we know that paradox of generosity is the more we give, the more we get back. But if no one teaches you that to begin with, then how do you know? You just tend to take things for granted. So there is a big aspect of the kind of aging out of the more traditionally, from a traditional charitable giving kind of perspective. Those individuals have not passed it on as well as prior generations have. Brian, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the point you made, just to double down on it. Nathan and I, at one point, we met for once a week, I think, for like a year and a half, writing this book, and just looking at a lot of the data, the first part of the book, Jim, and really unpacking it, and as the point he made there about the disassociation of religion with religion, as that number continues to go down, he and I remember one night having a conversation about what will replace that. By that we mean the traditional, the habit forming, the modeling that Nathan was referring to, and I still am like, that's a scary thought, because of how it was. I know personally for me, it was a very real thing. It was real with my own family, with the number of the parishes that we've lived in throughout our lifetime. And I loved how Nathan said it. It's like, inherent in our religion is the concept of not just consuming, but participating and supporting and stewardship and giving to those who are less fortunate. And when you take that out, let's just say of more than half of Americans, or the numbers is probably even bigger, what replaces that? What replaces that modeling? And I know at one point, I don't remember, Nathan, you and I were thinking about even writing a chapter about what could replace it. And the answer is it ended up not becoming a part of the book, because we had a really hard time figuring out on the scale that religion had historically done the modeling, the teaching, the tradition building of generosity. I remember that one night we were talking about the Peace Corps, something like the Peace Corps that inspires what the civic responsibility, and we don't love to add that to part of the conversation we're hoping to spark with our book, because there is probably no one answer the way that the faith-based and religion provided for generations before us and our generations that came before us.
Agreed. You look at Catholic Charities, which I believe at one point maybe still is the largest social service agency in the United States, and the generosity that comes from Catholics and even non-Catholics all over the world to support that work. Where would we be without an organization like that? And you both kind of allude to that a little bit in your book. Where would we be? What will society look like if we continue on this trend?
Yeah, I don't think most people realize that the nonprofit sector, and we talk about this in pretty good detail, but the size of the nonprofit sector, the number of jobs that are provided, the economy that it, we talk in the book about Nathan's alma mater, Notre Dame, and the impact it has on that local community. Jim, I know, and as friends of mine who don't even know what I do for a living, when they've been asking me about what the book's about, and I've tried to figure out how to come at this from them, and I often find myself starting with this very thing, which is, do you even understand how much of your life is in coming into touch points with a nonprofit, whether it be education, healthcare, whatever it might be, and the impact of that chapter that we have in the book about being a little bit dramatic about the woman who's about to give birth and goes to the hospital and the doors are shut, right. Those type of things. I think I think the context of that, the impact that the nonprofits in this country have and around the world, the size of it, how important it is to your comment about Catholic Charities. I felt like we needed to write a chapter about that, because if you don't understand that, I think that's an important contextual comment and data to understand, to then start to really understand how important it is that we try to figure out what's going on with the generosity crisis.
Nathan, how does your work, or how has your work with artificial intelligence helped kind of inform you as you wrote this book and on the generosity crisis, and maybe even on some of the solutions to it?
Yeah, the work in AI almost ended up being a means to an end, honestly, as a result of kind of not knowing at the time what it was called or what was happening, but really as a result of this idea that less people were giving. So I was running a fairly large fundraising program, and And, every year, we had new goals to raise more money, and honestly, there were, I won't name names, but there were people on my team that would say, well, we just need to build a better mousetrap. And so this idea of like just trying to get more and, more and more donors and just trying to convert them at any cost was essentially the way. And I don't think it just never really settled well with me. I was in the private sector 20 plus years ago before I got in the nonprofit sector, and always been kind of an early adopter and innovator.
Mhm.
And I looked at how the private sector was using AI to really create personalization at scale, like all about like me being an individual consumer of or potential consumer of a product versus just a white male, where historically, even if you were segmented, very broadly, but now it's like, I am Nathan Chappell that lives here, that has 2 kids, that has a dog, and that data is being used like that, in very intentionally. And so the idea of really using AI was to get out of this idea of just stereotyping people into 1 or 2 buckets, donor or non-donor or good or bad, but as an individual to say, this person is connected to our organization in a deep way or not. And then what are the things that we could do to help increase that or foster that relationship? And so, this has been a long journey. It's been, since 2017 of focused on using machine learning and deep learning to really, at this point, quantify connection of people to an organization. So an N of 1, a absolute precision to one person and their relationship to an organization. It really is, technologically, it's one of the only, going back to, how do we reverse this crisis? It's one of the things that has to occur, that nonprofits have to stop stereotyping people and start using data that they can, either they can manage or they can purchase to add to that, and really get to know people in a more intimate way. And the backdrop of all this is what AI has shown us, is that more is not better. The idea, where historically nonprofits think the world is their oyster, and if you could get $1 from every person in America, all your problems would be solved. Well, as Brian said, only 49.6% of Americans now give. I mean, it's a 16% decline since 2000. So it's pretty significant. So you have to first acknowledge that the world is not your oyster. But then even more, who actually cares enough about your organization, who has enough commonalities with the organization that they're a potential donor, which is a very, very small number compared to the world in general. And so AI has allowed us to look deep, and essentially, while there's this generosity crisis, we know more about what motivates giving than we've ever have before in history through our deep learning, to really understand the levers and what people look like when, before they make a gift or when they're going to make a repeat gift. So still very much in its infancy from a societal perspective, but light years from where we were even 5 years ago in understanding this.
And Jim, if I could piggyback on that, Nathan used the word the connection, and I've been talking about it as a competition for connection. One of the things I learned from Nathan early on too was not only all the things he just said, but how important it is to realize as a nonprofit that in any given day, a donor to you or a supporter of yours or somebody in your network is either moving closer to you or further away, because of their own interactions with you, or quite frankly, their interactions with others. And this is where I thought the work that we do at Junior World on the company side of things was really fascinating, because as more and more companies were beginning to realize that values and being a good company and to, making really good products that are good for the environment was smart business, their marketing and their communications efforts started, I talked about in the book, they started sounding like nonprofits. If you take a step back, I mean, some of them very mission oriented, very such that, I think we're getting to a point where some people might actually confuse, as I think we talked about it. I know we did in the book, whether or not Ben and Jerry's, which is a phenomenal company, is actually a company or a nonprofit. There's a blurring of the lines there. And I go back to that comment I made earlier on in the beginning, which is if people have to stop and think, the giving, usually doesn't follow. But I also think the bigger point there is just that every nonprofit that we have had the pleasure and the honor of working with, I had not appreciated until I went through this work of the last year and a half with Nathan to put in the context that they could be a phenomenal, and most of them are organizations, but you got to realize that people are living in a world with more information, more data is coming at them and changing their perceptions, their thoughts of an organization, whether they realize it even or not. And that I think is partly why less people are engaging in the traditional act of philanthropy. I think because they can get, I believe, the same physical good feelings of supporting a nonprofit if I buy from the right company or if I do some other things. Hence the comment I made about the menu to do good and to be generous. And I just think nonprofits have not yet, I know I didn't, and I think a lot of others hadn't really fully understood that the world we're living in is moving very, very quickly around them.
You picked up on where I was headed next, Brian. When you look at the title, we talk about the generosity crisis, but in the second half of the title, you start to allude a little bit to what the solution might be, and that's creating those radical connections. And I look at my own mailbox, and over the course of a month, I'll receive 50 solicitations from different charities that some we've given to and some we've never given to, but they're after us anyway. And I got onto a list, and I think we all get that. And so, like you said before, there's so much noise and so much information. If I'm a development director sitting in the seat and I'm listening to this conversation, where do I begin in making those radical connections? And I know that, at Changing Our World, we've had a lot of experience doing that.
I'll go quickly here, but I think the thing to frame up is that it's the difference between transactional and relational, and for a long time, many nonprofits have been transactional, and I get it. For a lot of, it was the way to do it, I think, but what we know is that the relational and what we came up with is the term radical connection. I think Simon Sinek really created a lot of buzz X number of years ago when he talked about tribes and how people understand and why they buy things, from companies. And it has a lot to do with seeing themselves, the same values, the shared. And I think that, and I'll let Nick, because Nathan got a great point of view on this as well. But I think the ability, as he was talking about earlier, to know more about a person so that you can more effectively communicate what some of the great programs that you're running as a nonprofit versus just a traditional headline. If we do really good work, it's being able to be, the three of us have three different interest areas, but care a lot about the same things, but maybe would be more, it would find it more appealing if we understood a different program or a different aspect or something along those lines. And that's the point, if I'm the development director that you asked me, Jim, to Nathan's point. It's a bit risky, but believe it or not, we believe you'll have more success by actually going deeper with the core folks that are radically connected versus trying to get more. And it's an interesting dilemma when I think many of us have been trained in the industry to get more. To Nathan's point, go get everybody to give you $1 type of mentality.
Yeah. No, I'll take a step back too, because this competition for connection that Brian talked about, most organizations don't realize how real that is. So first, you need to create some understanding of how every person's connection is being harvested by every company out there. And they don't want your affiliation. They don't want your association. They want your connection at this point. So nonprofits are competing at a completely different level than they ever have before. I mean, number of emails and number of, personalized type solicitations. So, and also with that, any person's ability to connect is a limited resource. I can't have a visceral connection to 1,000 different organizations. I mean, there's a very small, we haven't done the math or survey how many, but it's pretty small. So the message really is actually very freeing, to Brian's point. Like, this is really flipping the pyramid and getting away from this idea that more is better, but better is better. And we have this hypothesis, and we've been able to show this in our deep learning analysis, that if you can predict people or assess people based on their depth of connection, not based on their wealth and not based on just last visits or last interactions, but their true, like a more holistic depth, those people will stay with you much longer. So they're real, to the point that, and this is not new news, but a donor that stays with an organization, if I stay with an organization over time, the value, my lifetime value, is 15 times greater than a person that an organization, they send me a piece of mail and I give one donation. So 15 times greater. So the freeing part of this for us, I think, is really, and Jim, you saw this at the conference and some of the response, it's like, stop trying to just acquire more people at any cost, because those people aren't created equal. Start and understand who your population of people who do care, and really build this deep, two-way kind of visceral kind of relationship. And nonprofit, we talk about it being partnership. whenever we want money, we talk about partnership, but then we forget about that word right after we get the money, and so it really is this opportunity, to Brian's point, of like, go within, go deep, go within, invest the resources and the time to get to know people in a really deep way that they're going to stay with you, because the ROI proves itself. I mean, it's so much higher than this constant, cyclical thing of just acquiring.
And Jim, last thing I'll say on this topic is the July Chronicle of Philanthropy was the whole article, the whole magazine publication, was focused on this very topic. And I thought there was a wonderful example of a woman who was a major gift officer at the Houston Food Bank, who went in with the mindset of developing radical connections with those that were in her portfolio. And she did so, and the results speak for themselves. And I think, from again, back to your question, what do I make of this? If I'm a development director, you have a phenomenal case study, right? Just in July's Chronicle to take a look at.
And that's been a topic I've seen literally in the last weeks, not a new concept, but in the last months or weeks. And maybe it started with the Chronicle issue. And maybe I'm just like, you buy a red car and then you see all the red cars on the road. But I see a lot more people talking about trying to get out of the rat race of just acquiring more, but like going deeper and communicating in ways. And this goes true for corporations and for nonprofits. I mean, it's like, people want to do business with or give to organizations that get them, that know them, that you feel like you're going to go the distance with. And it's a big difference in how you from a philosophical perspective or cultural perspective of your organization, how you align your organization to want to go deep with fewer people than just, more surface level with more people.
And, because we are advancing our church, and a lot of our audience is religious communities or pastors or maybe foundations or development directors, we have, I think, a unique opportunity. Would you agree? And we do each week, maybe, to go deeper with the faithful, with those relationships. And it also goes back to why religion has always been perhaps the biggest share of the pie when we look at giving on an annual basis. But what advice would you offer to maybe a religious leader who is kind of listening to this conversation, and how do I apply this to my own community, my own parish?
Yeah, I would say, it's gonna sound potentially what's old is new again, but I think it's, for a pastor in particular, I'll put that in my, mine is a wonderful guy who has a great pulse of the community, a great sense of the community, and he gets that not just because of what he does, being himself and quote unquote walking the halls, but I also see him really understanding the community through the lens of having great relationships with some of the key stakeholders, some of the key folks that are involved, in our case, both the parish and at the school level, for instance. And I think having a great, and at the end of the day, what is that? I mean, that's leadership, right? And people follow leaders, and they want to be associated with leaders, back to Nathan's point, and people will go, the distance or stay with people who are true leaders in that sense. But I think great leaders seek the advice and counsel of others, and he does that in spades.
Yeah, I think we saw some great examples of this during COVID, where churches, parishes were shut down, and not prepared to deal with that. And there were some that just took to the streets, and they started modeling generosity to everyone they knew. And I'll tell you, that was like some of the best stories I've heard through COVID are really just being the hands and feet of just going out and modeling that. And I do think, as we settle back into pre-COVID days, the risk is like going back to this idea of like, you give money, it's a bit more transactional, you don't really know where it goes, but this conversation around like making a difference, and I don't know, it just becomes more of a two-way conversation than just a transactional thing. I think people expect more now. People want to be involved. I mean, I see, at least in a lot of evangelical churches, where you give, and then there's a pass through, and then the church will pass it through, but the person who gave the original gift doesn't get to feel the impact. It was the church that passed the money through to a local charity, and I think there's an opportunity there. I think it's an opportunity to, and a responsibility, I think, for any religious organization to model generosity in a very personal way, because it's not just about supporting the walls within, but it's about really being the hands and feet, and really, portraying what our Christian values of, leaving this world a better place. We're not here just for ourselves. We're here to make a difference and love all those that are around us. And there's Arthur Brooks, who Brian mentioned, had a New York Times quote that said, we're facing a crisis of love. But of course, Brian and I are like, well, then here's the antidote, because literally the term philanthropy means for the love of mankind. So you don't have to go very far. What's new is, or what's old is new again, or what Brian was saying, it's like, don't have to go very far. The answer is literally staring at us. We know what the recipe is for success. It's just literally, showing love through the kindness and generosity, and whether that's volunteering or giving money or whatever it might be. And from a religious perspective, the greatest opportunity to do that, because that's what they're called to do. That's what, we're all called to do, and be that living proof of generosity every day.
Well, I couldn't have said it better, Nathan. Just to kind of, as we draw our conversation to a close, I can only imagine that with this, the economy that we're currently in, and the hiking inflation and the rest, I would imagine that the demand for this book, or the timing of this book, couldn't be better. Are you seeing that? What kind of feedback are you receiving now, just on some of the preliminary press and feedback about the book?
For me, it's funny. I think we've gotten past some of the skeptics. I mean, there are people within the industry who are like, no, it's like, Voldemort. Like, you don't say it. We know it exists, but you just don't say
his
those
name,
words.
right?
Like, how dare you write a book called The Generosity Crisis? We don't know if we're in one. And we admit that in the book, that this area requires more study and research, but we do know that the trends are not promising in terms of, no matter which data you look at, in terms of the percentage of households that give. But with that said, this conversation's, it's been never really been in vogue until now. And I think it was to the article Brian was mentioning, the giving crisis in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, kind of broke the story, if you will. And I've seen a really incredible shift in just the industry and people's willingness to talk about the hard issues and admit that maybe not all is well in the Western Front. And so time will tell, but at the end of the day, we hope that this book, inspires people to look within at their own generosity in whatever form and fashion that takes, but also to think about their own personal responsibility to those around them that they influence, and hopefully, inspire and spark some conversation. So far, so good, I think, Brian.
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, Jim, the book might be well timed, and I say that honestly, because as for many of the points you talked about, the economy, and there's some even early analysis and some thoughts that will or will not the next few months, the end of this year, be as robust as giving has always traditionally been at the last 2 to 3 months of the year. And so is there some concern around that? So unfortunately, I think it's well timed. But as Nathan said, I think the book is actually a book of hope, to be honest with you, even though the name might give you something different. I do think there is something happening with the redefining of what is philanthropy, what is generosity. And, just because the Indiana School of Philanthropy, tracks traditional giving, and that is under, going the wrong way. There's no doubt about that. There's crowdfunding, there's, as Nathan said, there's acts of generosity every day and right in front of us. And so, but that doesn't help necessarily the nonprofit whose budget is reliant on whether, so that is a very real thing. And I just think that the book, I hope, not only starts the conversation, but, as Dr. Susan Raymond would often say in the halls of changing our world, that famous quote about Wayne Gretzky, why are you such a great hockey player? And he said, I didn't skate where the puck was, I skate to where the puck's going to be. And I think that, I hope the book also helps more nonprofits begin to think about where are they going, and is the model of philanthropy, the fundraising model, that whether they're direct mail or not, or whether they're major gifts or not, like, are they just having an honest look about what will help them move forward? And I think a lot of the answers lie in understanding, some of the things we've talked about today, the branding, communications, values oriented, communicating to those that will want to be communicated with. I mean, rethinking a lot of maybe the strategies, I hope, is also a byproduct of what grows out from here, because as I said to Nathan not too long ago, I would love nothing more than for us to have to ditch the name, because quite frankly, generosity comes roaring back. That'd be simply amazing, just to see that happen as well.
What a great byproduct, and what a great ending to our conversation today. The book is called The Generosity Crisis, The Case for Radical Connection to Solve Humanity's Greatest Challenges. I'm going to leave links in the show notes of this episode for our listeners to click on and reserve your copy. It's coming out this month. Thank you, Brian Crimmins. Thank you, Nathan Chappell, for being on Advancing Our Church. And thanks for really introducing this conversation for all of us so that we can really raise our awareness and sharpen our strategies and address this crisis together.
Thanks so much, Jim. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jim.
I want to thank Brian Crimmins and Nathan Chappell for joining us today. I'll leave links in the show notes to Brian and Nathan and their new book, The Generosity Crisis. Once again, Brian, Nathan, thank you again for joining us here on Advancing Our Church and for this great conversation today. Thanks for all you do to advance the mission of our church. Well, that's our show this week. Special thanks to Podastery Studios for another great show. And if you'd like to help our show, please leave us a rating wherever you downloaded this podcast. And if this is your first time listening to Advancing Our Church, I hope you'll stick around and subscribe, because you can find us on all places where you download your favorite podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And for more information about our show, please visit us at advancingourchurch.com. Advancing Our Church is a production of Changing Our World, and we are a fundraising and social impact consulting firm that has been advising both nonprofits and corporations for more than 2 decades. For more information, please visit us at changingourworld.com. Well, that's it for me, everybody. I hope you have a terrific week. Take care, and God bless.